All right, so we've got part two really of our React review. We did a lot of good stuff in part one. We have our nav bar in app. We have some basic bootstrap layout. We have a nav bar that we made with Bootstrap's nav bar. We used the React router DOM link component, and with as, we can tell these links to behave like React router links to take us to our different pages. We set up routing with React router, right? And we had the create browser router object, and we helped build this together. AJ, I think you walked us through building a couple of these. We have our route objects, we have our children off of app, and we have set that up in the router provider. And then on the pages, our home page is pretty minimal. Our favorites page is also pretty minimal. Um, the all characters page is pretty minimal, and we'll hit the outlet context in a minute. The about page we built out, and we have some cool stuff happening here. Right. And Tom, you really navigated us through. We have some component state to hold the number of characters and the number of episodes. We wrote this really nice get about data function that, in fact, in just a minute, I'm going to refactor so that we can use this everywhere in our React project. And this is an async function that makes an API call to the Rick and Morty API, and it takes in two arguments. And I fleshed out our JS doc style comments here. And the nice thing about writing JavaScript code comments in this way is if I hover over something in VS Code, it uses it. And so it takes two arguments, and one is simply a string, right? So that if I want to get, say, all of the episodes, I would say episode, or for the first episode, or if I want to get all the characters, I would say character. And I'm calling that resource because that's the REST API term for data that we get via a route or a path. And then this second argument, we actually pass a function into that is going to update component state. And actually, I want to rename this to update. Let's just call it update state callback, which is not the best name, but it's not the worst name. And we used this in two different use effects. We call the Rick and Morty API to get all of the characters, and we pass in that component state update function to update characters. So when I call this, we will execute this function, grab the data. In this case, we're just getting the count. And we're using a second use effect so that React can keep track of the state updates to do the same thing for episodes. And because we have an empty dependency array here for our use effects, each of these fire after the component mounts, after first render. And they fire once and only once. And it happens, since it's after first render, we need this ternary so that when this component first renders, we don't have the data yet. We don't show anything. Once we do have the data, we do display it. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions or there might be something good to dig into a bit. Chris, yes, sir.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure for those both use effects, the data is still the same, right? They still get the, I guess it's not just character data and it's not just episode data, right?
Um, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So the when you're making the API call, that data is still like it's still the same. It's not broken into, hey, this is character data and this one's specifically episode data.
That actually is what's happening
Like
here.
to the, is it um,
Yeah. So let's actually we can watch this happen because I have this console log here. Let me go ahead and let's uh let's just console log response dot data and I'll add a little message here. Let's say response data and let's run this code and we can see it in action. And let me refresh the page. And is this font size good for everyone? Just to double check. Cool. So the about page uh mounts our component is function is running for the first time. We render. We don't do the use effects yet. After the first render, this first use effect happens. And for this one, we are actually calling the Rick and Morty API and hitting that character endpoint, right? And in fact, if I clear both of these and refresh, we can see the HTTP requests that our JavaScript code makes. And one is to get the characters, as we can see, if I can drag this out, there we go. It's a little hard to see, but Rick and Morty slash character. And the other is to Rick and Morty slash episode, right? And if we look in the console, we see that we call get about data and it constructs this URL with character at the end and it grabs the character data. And then when we call it the second time, it gets the episode data. Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah, I just couldn't see how the data was getting how it was getting um, parsed out. I
Um,
just couldn't see it in the API call because it was using resource.
oh, yeah. So
Um,
remember, so this is just a string. So basically, we change the URL that we hit with axios.get depending on this argument. Does that make sense?
okay. No,
Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense now.
cool. And in fact, we can do a little bit of refactoring here, and then I will move on. But we'll just do const. Let's just call it. Let's just call it endpoint, just so I don't have too many things with the same name. And let's just do Axios get endpoint. And let's just console.log and we'll just say endpoint. And let me refresh so we have a clear log here. And so we can see how we construct two different URLs that make our API call right here and here. And then because the way Tom designed this is the second argument, we actually pass in a function that we call down here. I can update different parts of component state. So for this one, I'm updating my character count component state. For this one, I'm updating episodes count component state. Does that help break it down?
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. Yeah, great question, man. Thank you. Yeah, and please keep questions like that coming, guys. That's exactly what this review is for. And so we have this about page. And then, Rick, you were helping us build and driving us or navigating us through building this all characters page, right?
Yep.
And we decided that we want to lift up some component state because, hey, I'm already fetching all the characters over here. I might only need the character count, but I'm actually getting all the data I need. So we had started the process of really refactoring our code, right? And up here in our app component, at the very top level of our component hierarchy, we created some component state that's going to hold the characters. And we just started to get into context, right? Because now that I have this state up here in the app component, I can't pass it directly into my pages as a prop. I was trying to drag this from TLDraw onto VS Code. Um, since Outlet renders all of the pages for us as children, I need to use Outlet context. right? And the way that we do this with React Router is we create a context object that we pass into this prop that has to be named context in the outlet. And then we can use a hook so that any child of the outlet, any page that the outlet renders, or anything that gets rendered inside a page that the outlet renders, we can use context object. And just for fun to put something here, let's just put like hello world. And so on this all characters page, I'm using this use outlet context hook and grabbing that context object, right? So I'm taking context obj and destructuring it to grab this character's prop, right? Which would be the same as I could just do context obj dot characters, but we do so much destructuring in React that this is really the standard way of writing this code. So if I go over to my app now and I navigate to my all characters page, we'll see in the console log that dummy data that I put in, and we see their hello world that's coming from our app. And in fact, where I want to end up is I want to be using characters in multiple places, right? Because I want characters here on the about page so I can get characters.length. And I want characters on the all characters page. So I need to use my outlet context in multiple spots. And that's the beauty of the hook. So I'm going to use that same use outlet context hook. We're going to go ahead and import it. And over here, we're going to do const, and I know I'm getting an object, right? Um, I could do it this way, right? Where I would then be able to do, and in fact, let's just console log this just for fun to see it. So I'm now grabbing this context object. And if I navigate to my about page, we see here we go is our context object that has this property characters. That's an array. But again, using the syntactic sugar, I'm going to destructure that object to grab the characters property and assign its value to a variable named characters and just do it like this. And now over here we have hello world as well. And so what I'm actually going to do is a little bit of refactoring. And before I refactor about page, I just want to pause and check in to see if folks have questions around outlet context or any of the code I've written thus far, because this is going to be like the base of our pyramid for the next step. So this is a really good time to review, or if we want to see an example of this somewhere else to check that out. All right. Rick, yes, sir.
Yeah, I got a quick question. It's a lot of the research that I was doing. What is the best, what do you call it? The standard or best practice? Is the best practice to do most or all of this inside of the app.jsx?
Um,
The the placing of the context to pass it down to the children.
yeah, it's a good question.
And the
There's
only
no
reason
one,
sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
there's no one hard and fast answer. Um, I think what the important thing to think about is how React works with parents and children. For example, if I want for whatever reason, to have characters in my navbar. If I have state that needs to live in different parts of my component hierarchy, then I need it to be in a parent, right? If this only needed to be here or only needed to be here, that would be fine. But if it needs to be shared across the same level, then we need to, it's called lifting state up to the parent. So that's why you will so often see stuff in an app, but it's really more of a design question. So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind.
All right, so it's a design thing. I only say that because um, in a lot of the Reddit post and the overflow.com and all the different places that I've looked for like examples of code, most of them that I've seen separate, well, basically separate all the context into its own file. That's why I was asking what
I
the
would
best practice is.
I would have to see the example.
All
If
right.
there's something you can send me, I can take a look.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll try to find it and send it to you.
Yeah, because like as things get more complex, there's whole state management libraries like Redux that we haven't even gotten into. So it depends on a lot of different things.
All right.
Yeah. Again, I think what's important is kind of understanding how React works and when I need to, right? Um, and we do need to do this here because all this API work that I'm doing, I want this to happen somewhere else. So what I want to do, and I'm going to write out some extra steps here, right? Make use state to hold characters. Well, I've done that. Great. Make API call to get all the characters. Well, we actually have that really nice function that we've written already. And I want to move or let's refactor our existing, I think it was called get about function. So it can be used everywhere to get anything from the Rick and Morty API, because then I can use it in app. So let's see what this looks like. And this is a little bit new, but I think it's going to be really good to see. I'm going to make a file. I could name it anything I want. I'm naming it API to indicate that it is holding functions intended to talk to our Rick and Morty REST API. And the first thing I'm going to do is take this whole function right here and move it from here into API.js. And I'm going to export it as a named function because we might have more exports in here as time goes on. And because the way that we designed this function, and Tom, when you kind of walked us through it, was everything that it needs gets passed in as an argument. There's nothing in here that depends directly on code created somewhere else, right? So over here in the about page, I can import that function from my file. And so if I made more of these kind of helper functions, I would put them in this API.js file, and I can call it here. And let's see if this works, because my about page doesn't seem to be showing stuff. And indeed, there's something I forgot. And this is part of why when you're refactoring code, when I'm refactoring is changing the way the code works under the hood without changing what it does. It's like a black box. Like I don't care what happens inside the black box. When we refactor, we mess around with the black box. But you have to be really careful and deliberate because there's often a lot of little things that get you. And in this case, it happens to be that we need Axios to be in this same file. And one of the cool things about refactoring is it tends to improve the quality of your code. Because now this is all really self-contained. And if I go to my page, my about page, um, the about page doesn't depend on Axios. I just need to grab this get about data function that is then that uses Axios. So I just want to check in here to see if folks have questions or steps that of that process that I went through that might be good to review. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is refactor this function more because I actually I want to make it a little more flexible. Um, I want to use it not just for updating my about page, but I want to be able to use it in general just to grab response data. And so I'm going to modify it a bit more. I think I'm just going to rename it, and we're just going to call it get request. And by using VS Code's renaming feature, which you can do if you right click on it and you go to the rename option, rename symbol, it renames it everywhere in the project. So down here, we see it's been renamed. And next, I am going to, and let's change it here too. So this part can actually stay the same. And I'm doing this because then later we could even use this not just for all characters, but to grab an individual character. And now for this update function, I'm not going to add info.count. I'm just going to add data. Now, this is going to break the about page because the about page sort of depends on this, but we're not going to quite do this the same way in the about page anymore. For one thing, we're not going to get the characters at all. We're going to do that in app. We still do want to do episodes though. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a little arrow function here, and it's going to take that response data and specifically update the count. Right. And so what I've done here is I've made a more complex arrow function that is expecting that response data that we get from the Rick and Morty API. And I'm telling my arrow function from that response data, find this info property that's also an object, grab this value count, and then update episodes count with it. So I have this really flexible get request. And the only thing I'm sort of hard coding in here is the response object has a property named data, and that has the data that I care about. And I just want to check in here too to see if folks have questions or there might be something good to review. Tom, yes, sir.
Um, since we made it its own component, um, I see that we can pretty much import it anywhere. However, is that something we could also pass as close my notes, but a context in that context hook thing?
Yeah, absolutely. If we needed to, I could pass it in the context. If I wanted to, I could put it in here. But I don't need to because it doesn't depend on component state or anything because we've made it an isolated function. But we absolutely could if we wanted to or needed to. Yeah, great question. And in fact, we're gonna now use it here in the app. And actually, if I go back to my about page, um, that code I commented out, let's actually copy it and move it into our app.jsx. And let's uncomment it. And again, you have to be really careful when refactoring like this because it's shockingly easy to miss an important step like importing something, or there's all sorts of little things that change. So you have to be really slow and deliberate. Um, but now, fingers crossed, our context object that's passing in this character state will actually pass in real character data. So let's see if this works. So let me go to my homepage and refresh. And we see that indeed, when my React app loaded from the very beginning with app.jsx, this use effect fired. It made an API request to our endpoint. We got some response data. It's put up here in the characters state. I think that what I want to do is I want to add console.log, just saying characters, just to see what's in there. Let's make sure that it's working. And I see that indeed I'm using my get request function successfully to get the character data. So the next question now is my context object and outlet still behaving the way it should? So I'm going to go to all characters. And on the all characters page, I'm using that use outlet context hook. It gets me that context object. I'm grabbing that characters array from it, and we see we have the characters here. And so now I can do the same thing here on the about page. And in fact, I have this here. And now I can do a little bit of code refactoring, and we're not going to use that. But what we'll do is we'll just do const character count equals characters dot length. And now if I go to my about page, we have characters with an S. And let's see if this works. And I'm not seeing it show up when I would expect it to, but let's debug. This is actually, I think, a good debugging opportunity. Something has gone wrong here. Maybe React is not updating when I expect it to. I see here it's checking characters count, and if it exists, we should be seeing a message. Right, if it's not undefined or null. And I'm creating it here from this, so I know something must be wrong with this characters count variable. I'm going to check, and I'm going to console log it right here, right before we render. And let's just say characters count. And something is not right. It's still undefined,
I don't think
even
you
though
can
I have this
do-
characters array. And let's, in fact, console.log characters. And we see something really interesting. And Tom, this isn't quite what you were asking about earlier, but it's in the same ballpark. We have all of these print statements, but I see the about page loads. We have our character data, but this characters count is not being updated for some reason. And I wonder if it's because I've created a const here. Sam, yes, sir.
I was just gonna ask, instead of doing the characters dot length, should it be characters dot info dot count?
Oh, you're right. It's not about React at all. It's even simpler.
I was just about to say, yeah, because we're trying to
Yeah.
call length on an object, and it's only returning 20 characters at a time anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Info dot. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So I need to do a little bit of code refactoring I thought I could get away with using the characters array, but I can't. You guys are totally right. If we go to the Rick and Morty API for whether it's episodes or characters, this info object has everything, but the results only give me 20 at a time, and we have to paginate through. So I have to go back to my app, and we get the data that we need. We do it right here. It just becomes a little more messy because I actually need to do more stuff with this response object than just set characters. So I'm actually going to do a couple things. This is actually a good example of how different designs force different trade-offs, because this function is really cool and flexible, but because I'm using it now, it's forcing me to add a little bit of complexity for something that there are other ways to do a bit more simply. But on the other hand, this gives us some nice things. So there's usually not one right way. It's more about trade-offs. So I'm going to do characters, count, set characters, count, and we're going to set this to be null to begin with. And now what I need to do here is write a handler function to update state for characters and characters count. And I'm just going to call this handle update characters. And it will take in my response data. And it will, this is going to be a little tricky. We'll see how this goes. Set characters, response data, dot results. And we'll do set characters count response data dot info dot count. And I'm going to take a quick look at my API function to make sure I'm remembering how all of this works. And we pass in response data. And so this updating function is now getting more complex. And so now, and let's see, give me just a minute to see if we get this working correctly, and then we'll pause for questions. So now, if this works, and we'll add a console log and we'll say handle update characters. Let's see what happens. Characters count is not defined. Set characters count. Oh, let's go back to our home page. So it looks like this is working. I see characters in here. Let's console log characters count too, to make sure that that state is correct before I worry about anything else. I see that characters count is 826, which is correct. So once my API call is done, I'm taking that response data. It's getting passed into this function, and it's grabbing the list of characters. And it's also from the response data info grabbing the count. And now in the about page, I should be able to, oh, I have to here in our context, I have to add this to the context object, right? And so now my context object has characters count, it's getting passed into the outlet. And now over here, we can grab it. And what I want is actually characters count. And fingers crossed, we now see the characters count and the number of episodes. Tom, yes, sir.
So Can you walk me through a little bit? Because it looks like on the main app page, we're refreshing the character count for each API call, and the character count doesn't change. Um, the
Well,
M
let
the
me correct you there because if Rick and Morty, so you're correct that like day to day, the character count isn't going to change, but in theory, new characters could be added to the show, right?
Oh, that's not what I meant.
Oh,
I just meant like how we have it structured in our current thing. If you scroll up on app a little bit, like it looks like handle update characters is going to update info.count for each API call. So each list of 20 characters, it's going to respond to us that we have 826 total characters
that's
for
correct.
each pagination.
That's correct.
Um, so is that because that rather than returning the whole object, it's because you decided to split it here and that's why we have to do it that way?
Do you mean why is the number 826 as opposed to something else? Or
No, like, let me see if I can see. So rather than, so I see that you're using characters, right, as a
oh,
context object. So on the
yeah,
about page, why couldn't we just do characters dot
yeah,
data dot info dot count,
yeah,
and then it would only do it once rather than, for each pagination.
yeah. And I think is that is this about the difference between the number of characters we get in that results array versus the total number of characters in the show?
Um, I just mean it reduces the amount of use states that we have to update simultaneously.
Yeah. I
Um,
think I think the short answer is like we get two different things from the Rick and Morty API. We get when I hit this endpoint to get characters, it gives me here we go. This metadata object and this count gives me the total number of characters there is, period. And then the results, like we were saying, gives us the first 20 of those characters. And I'm going to use this first 20 later, but I need the total number of characters so that on my about page I can share like how many characters are in the show.
right. Could you go to your about page?
Yeah. I do want to move on though, because I want to make sure that we build the
Absolutely.
card.
Absolutely. So instead of, because we're using uh characters count,
Oh
so
yeah, and
instead of
that's the
using
factory
characters
state.
count, um, would it be possible to use characters instead? And then,
Short answer is no, because
oh,
characters is this is an array of the first 20 characters, right? But this is total number of characters in the show.
And it comes off the metadata, not the actual
Yeah,
characters themselves. It comes off of the info
oh,
metadata.
okay. Sorry,
yeah,
I didn't see
yeah,
that. That's what I was trying to ask. Is like,
yeah,
is it because of our restructuring like that to there? And
yeah,
is that why we had to call it for each pagination? Because I thought we were just bringing in a solid object right there. So
yeah,
that's why I was like, why don't we just do dot data dot info and just do, one thing? Okay, makes sense.
yeah, exactly. No, it's a good question. And that was kind of originally what I'd attempted to do and ran into the same issue. And also, this is a good example of why names are so important because I totally also I think using that name characters count was throwing me off. And now it helps to illustrate a bit more that these are really two different things. Yeah, great question. So this is good though, because like, we're really digging in to stuff, and hopefully are you guys starting to feel more comfortable with using outlet context, with making a context object, passing it into this context prop, and then using all characters, or using outlet context to grab it? Tom, yes, sir.
Quick one, I promise. Outlet context, is that considered a use state as well? So will it, if that changes, will it update the components?
That is a good question, and I believe the answer is yes. So there's state props and then there's context, and I'm pretty darn sure that what happens is if this context that I'm using changes, then this component re-renders. Yeah, I'm like 99% sure. Yeah, great question. React has a doc somewhere that goes super in depth into the component lifecycle. It's a little buried though. I will find it and share with folks. The old version of the docs had a really good one. I'll see if I can't dig it up. But yeah, that's an excellent point. Context change will cause the component to re-render. So we have this data now on our all characters page. And we know that we want to go back to our diagram, especially because we've been kind of really digging into context and stuff. Now that I have all the characters, I need to make a character card to show information about them. So I'm going to need to make this character card component, and we're going to need to do stuff with it. Right? And so I think, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the Rick and Morty API, and we're going to see here what a character looks like. They have an ID, a name, status, so on. And I'm just going to start building out a character card component. And I'll put a fragment around it. And we're actually going to need to use a little bit of Bootstrap before we hit the API. And we're going to use the Bootstrap card component. And again, I'm just going to copy this example code. Though in fact, in this case, I can actually simplify it a bit. I can just do card. I don't think I'm even going to worry about styling. And I want a card image. And we'll leave it like that. And we're going to have a source property. And now I do start to get into different props, right? I'm going to need to pass things in here. So I think before I get too lost in that sauce, I'm going to kind of eat my own words here and just copy and paste and do a little formatting. And so I've got a card. I just want to make sure that this code works, that I haven't done anything silly. So on the all characters page, I'm just going to show a card real quick. It's not going to have any data, but I want to make sure I don't have any typos or any kind of bugs that are an easy fix. Because again, I think if you guys just try to always run your code right after you write it, then life becomes easier. Right? And now I see I've got a card title. I see this, and we have a button that we can use, and we're off to the races. And now we can start turning this static mockup sort of into life with data. And so if I go to the Rick and Morty API, we have all of this data. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass in response data into each character card. And we're going to call it, let's just call it character data. Right? And so what I want to do is take this characters array and use .map and make a card for each character. So it's going to look something like this. Characters.map, and let's do just C, just to keep it simple. And we'll do char card. And when we're mapping and making a bunch of sibling components in React. React really wants us to use a key that's unique so React can find each item in the list, so to speak. So we'll do c.id since that should be unique. And then we will do char data equals c and just pass in that whole character object right there. And now if I go to my app, I see a whole bunch of cards, which is a good sign because it at least means that I'm mapping correctly, right? We're not doing anything with this prop that we're passing in as data. And I can name this char data. It might make, I think the naming consistency helps when you're reading code. So now let's go to our card and let's use this data. And let me pull up the Rick and Morty API so I can make my life easier. And over here, I want to show the name. So first of all, I need to grab the character data as a prop from all of the different props that we might pass in. And then I know this is an object, so I'm going to destructure my character data, and I'm going to grab name, I'm going to grab status, I'm going to grab species, and I'm going to grab location, because why not, and image. And I think that's a great starting point. And so now over here in source, let's use image. And for title, let's use name. And let's see how we do. Let's see if I have any typos or bugs. I'm half right because we're seeing names, but we are seeing the image is not showing up. And I'm going to do a little getting rid of console logs because there's a lot of stuff here that's no longer useful to me. So let's go to app.jsx. Let's comment that out. Let's comment that out. I might want it later. Let me jump to definition, right? If you right click and you do go to definition or F12, it will take you right to the file. And we'll leave that. I think that's good to see. We'll comment that out and we'll comment that out. And that ought to clean stuff up a good amount. So now on my all characters page, I can refresh it. I can see what's going on. And interestingly, I'm not seeing any errors in the console. So that tells me I have a silent issue, which in JavaScript almost always means something is undefined that I'm not expecting to be undefined. And so it's almost definitely this image URL. So let's just console.log image. And that actually looks correct. And I see now, and I saw a hand just go up, Tony, and you might be going here, that I have the best kind of error, which is a simple error to fix, right? So this is simple programmer error, but there's so much complicated stuff happening that errors like this happen all the time. And I think seeing how to like systematically debug like that and console log is really important. And now we've got the images, which are way too huge, but in the interest of time, I'm not even going to worry about that. Actually, I think that if I hadn't tried to not copy stuff, I bet this variant top might be the bootstrap setting that keeps the image from taking up massive amounts of space. So let's see what that does. And it doesn't seem to change anything, so I'm not going to worry about it. And now let's just add a little bit of information about our person. We're just going to say status, and species, and location. And location is a tricky one. So this is important, and I kind of threw this in on purpose. Location is an object, right? Location is an object. So I can't just do location. If I do, we see this error. Objects are not valid as React children. I need to do location dot, I think it was name. and we should see location Citadel of Risks. And I really want to put each of these inside like a paragraph tag because I want them on separate lines. So let me do that here as well, real quick. And there's some keyboard shortcut that will do this much more nicely. I'm just being a little lazy here and doing it.
Or
this
you
way.
could have just done breaks.
Oh yeah, I could just do a break as well. It's true. And in fact, this last one, I'm going to do one better than a paragraph tag. I'm going to do a href equals location dot URL. And we'll just leave it like that. I'm not going to get too mixed up about that. Actually, this is driving me a little nuts. So I am going to do p location. This is, you can tell I've spent too much time doing front end engineering because the fact that that location is part of the URL was driving me mad. So now this is not underlined and part of the link. And this actually is not very cool. It'd be nice if it took me to a site, but it at least demonstrates the principle. So I now have a whole bunch of character cards, and we're getting to a good spot here, right? Next up is to start adding favorites. But before I do that, I want to check in and see what questions folks have, right? We've built our character card. It takes in this prop character data, char data, which is an object, and we destructure that object. And let's comment out this console log. And we use the bootstrap card to show information about our character. And we're getting all the characters from outlet context and then using characters.map to render them. What are people curious about that you might want to see again or dig into a bit before we start adding in the favorites feature? Okay, cool. Let's keep on rolling. And I do apologize. We might get a little tight on time. I have a 3 o'clock meeting, so I think we'll at least get a little bit of Cypress in. And I am going to hop real quick to our Rick and Morty requirement stock to see what else we need to do here. So I had all this stuff written out earlier. And there we go. So we've done pretty much all this. The air routes I haven't gotten to in the not found page. I'm not so worried about that. The nav bar we have working. Character detail page, that's an important one. And I actually totally forgot about that. Right? This is why I like writing this stuff down and favorite characters. So let's tackle character details and then we'll do favorite characters.
Yeah,
Right,
we
so for
might
character
run out of time.
yeah, I'm not sure. We'll see about Cypress. I do apologize. I think I need to prioritize building the feature set first. So character detail is this, right? And just to remind us, this is the important part here is the URL and use params. So I think this one is going to be really good to see. So for character detail, I need to do a couple things. I need to make a skeleton page. I need to create a route for it, right? A React router route. This route needs to use a URL param ID. So I want it to look like this, character / ID. My page uses use params to grab ID. And then we use the ID to make an API call to get character data. We need to put it in component state somewhere. And then we render our character card. So you guys can see how, like, once you start getting comfortable sort of pseudocoding and writing out implementation steps like this, a lot of it is sort of repetitive. And a lot of the code follows the same pattern, but then this is how you start to get more efficient and more consistent. So let's go ahead and dive in and do this. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my, we're going to call it character detail page. And we'll have a fragment here. And I'm in fact going to just copy all of this and put it up here in some comments. There we go. And I know that I will need to use use state and use effect. I know I will need to use the use params hook. And I know I will need to use my own get request API call that I wrote. And I know that I will need to use my character card component that I wrote. Right? And I'm going to need all of these things. So next up, so I have the skeleton page, right? Let's just add, in fact, h2 character detail. I now need a route for it. So let's go to our router JSX file. And it's going to be another child of our app component. And the path will be character / and then this colon tells React Router that I'm making a variable, that this is a URL param, that this is a value that's going to change. And then we use the page. And I want to test out my code. So I'm going to manually go to a character detail page. And there's nothing here yet, but I know my route works. Right? I now know for a fact my route works. And I'm going to just close out some things that we don't need as I go here. So let's use the use param hook next to get that parameter, because that's the next most important thing. So use params is going to return an object. If I had multiple things in the URL, like whatever, I would have multiple properties on my object. But since I just have the one ID param, use params will return that. And I just want to check in on this code thus far, because I know folks were mentioning use params earlier, and this being sort of a sticking point. And I want to see how people are feeling about this, because this is super, super important. Right. And the other way to do this, just to kind of demonstrate it, this use params hook returns an object with all the different URL params. And so here we see I have that object with an ID of 3, ID 3. And if I had updated my route like this, then I would see another param, right? If I had done something like this, then we see ID and whatever, because now this route has to have these two things in it, each of which is a URL param. But I only want the one, and React Router will only allow me to have the one, and that property is ID. And so I'll kind of I don't know. I'll leave this there commented out in case we want it. But this is really the code that matters. So we're actually getting kind of close to the finish line here. because I've made a route, right? I've made a skeleton page, I've made a route, I've gotten the URL param, I've tested it, and now I need to make an API call. And I know how to do this because I've done this a lot now. It's going to need some component state. I'm going to need the use effect. And it's going to fire that GET request. So let's start going ahead and building this out. So I know I'm going to end up with some character data state. And right now it's going to be empty. And I know I'm going to pass it into my character card, but I don't want to do that until it exists. So I'm going to need a ternary. And I'm going to add on the other side of a ternary a message and just say no data, just so I know that it's working. Now let's write our use effect. And just like we have for our homepage and the other pages, we want this use effect to fire. But there's one key difference here. And someone pointed this out. There's two ways to get to this character detail page. One way is I'm really excited about, a character in Rick and Morty, and I share the link with you, and you paste the link in your browser, and you click on it, and React Router grabs this and loads the page. But there's also the use navigate hook and other ways, and this might change. So I really need use effect to actually kind of pay attention to this ID property. And I think this will do the job. I might be wrong here. We might need to change this a bit, but I think this is a good starting point. And let's see how we do with this. And now in this use effect, I'm going to call my GET request, and we are going to hit the Rick and Morty API, and our endpoint will be character / ID. And that's an example of multiple characters, which is not what I want. Here's a single character. So my GET request will look like this. Character / ID. And I'm going to tell it once it has the character, it's going to set the character data. And I'm passing in this response, and it should just be sending me back an object. And fingers crossed, this will do the trick. And let's see how we do. And indeed, now I've got summer. I'm seeing some warnings. So let me clear the console and refresh. And it's interesting. We're getting this warning on the character detail page. We're getting it in the character card. Paragraph cannot appear as a descendant of P. So first of all, this isn't breaking anything, but it is good to try and not have too much of this stuff stick around. And I wonder if it's got to be related to one of these paragraph tags, right? And I don't even know which. And I might just replace these as divs to see if I can get this thing to go away. But if I don't, I'm going to ignore it for the moment because it's not breaking anything. So ideally, you kind of want to always fix your warnings. Tom, yes, sir.
For what it's worth, I helped someone out with this the other day. That's just bootstrap weirdness. And it's
Oh.
already predefined as card.text as yeah, I think it said it was predefined as a paragraph. So anything else you put in there, it freaks out and it's
That's
like, oh, you can't have a list in here or you can't have a whatever in here because
uh,
I have another class or another thing to handle this.
got it. Okay. That is super helpful. That is exactly what's going on. So I wonder if we can do multiple text. Yeah, we're not going to worry about this too much, but I wonder, you know what, I'm not going to worry about it right now. we might be able to do.
I had to
Mike-
I had to do an unordered list with list items on mine, but it did work.
It did. That actually is not a bad idea either.
There's actually a bootstrap thing. I think it's like a list group or something like that. If that's what
Oh,
if you use that, then it won't freak out. But if you try to just do unordered list, it typically will still freak out.
got it. Okay. In that case, I'm gonna not worry about it right now, just to make sure that we can keep pushing. I am gonna add a note up top here, though. To do fix the issue with card dot text nested peas by using bootstraps. What was it called, Tom?
I believe it
Bootstraps
was
thing.
a list group.
This group, or use a unordered list. Yeah. Oh yeah. List group. There we go. So that probably will do it. I'm gonna leave that as a to-do. I hate to leave the warning, but this way we can keep rolling. And otherwise, we're good to go here, where I can change my character and we're set. And so our next task, and actually this is a good point to check in because we did just set up the use params hook. So I do want to see what questions folks have about how this character detail page is working with use params and use effect, and having use effect pay attention to when ID changes. Right, and the reason to do this is maybe something in our code, or maybe someone's clicking a button somewhere else, and we're doing well, I can't change the param directly in here, but if there are other ways to change this, and this way, if this changes, then it updates. All right, let's build out the favorites page, and then I think I'll have to pause because we're getting close to I have to meet with Francisco and some other Code Platoon folks in a couple minutes. And one moment here, my apologies. All right, let's build out favorites, and then we can take a quick break and sort of assess. So I know that on the favorites page, I need to get characters. I need to know if someone is or isn't a favorite, and I need these buttons to work. So let's start with our character card. Let's mess with this button. Let's just start by adding. Let's just say add favorite and remove favorite. And let's just maybe make them look different so we can tell. And then we'll start building this out. And we need a couple things to happen here. I need to know is favorite. I need to be able to add to favorites. And I need to be able to remove from favorites. Right. And the big question is, where do I want this logic to live? And where do I want this state to live? Now, the state I need to have really. There we go. There we go. I really need my state to live up here in app. Because I'm going to want it here. I need the list of favorites here on the favorites page. And I might need to even pass it. It needs to get passed into the character card. right? And let me go borrow a character card here. Because I might have a character card on the all characters page. I might have it on the favorites page. And in fact, I have it on the character details page. Right, which has ID, the ID that we get from React routers params. And this card is in all those spots, right? And I need to be able to do a couple things. I need to be able to add, and I need to be able to remove, and I need to know is favorite. So because this is in a bunch of different spots and I need all the favorites on my favorites page, I'm going to have to put stuff in outlet context. And that is going to mean state living up in my app component. So up here, we're going to make an array of favorites and a set favorites function. And just to keep it simple, I think what I will do is write some code here to add a favorite. And we'll add in some character data. And it will, it's not going to return anything, but it will update favorites array or create updated favorites array with new character. And so I'm going to call set favorites, and I need to create a copy of the existing array and add the new character to it, because React needs a new array object so it knows that it's changed. I can't just modify an existing array. And is favorite is going to be pretty similar. We're going to pass in some character data. I'm then going to check if JavaScript actually has a great includes function now, which makes doing this really, really easy. So dot includes will actually look for, I think it should include an object. I thought it would include an object. We'll see if it doesn't work. I was doing this the other day and I think it did work for me. And in fact, there's a Stack Overflow post here. And it seems to say that it'll work. So let's just run with it. And if it doesn't, we'll adjust course. And then we'll do const remove favorite. And we are actually going to do favorites dot filter, which will create a new array. And we will return everything except the one that matches. So if a character's ID does not equal our character's ID, then we keep it in the list. And now that I have all of these, I can add these to my context object. And now that they're on the context object, I can use them on the character card by using React context. And I apologize, I had to send a message real quick. So I have used outlet context. And so let's do, we know we're going to call it, and it's going to return a context object. And from it, I want is favorite, add favorite, remove favorite. And fingers crossed, let's add some on clicks here. So on click, we're going to, let's call, in fact, we'll make an arrow function. And it is going to add favorite with our character data. And over here, let's do the same thing. And I don't really like quite how React is formatting this, or how VS Code is formatting this. I think this is maybe a bit easier to read. Right, so we have the two props for the button. And then this button is also going to have two props. And we're going to have an on click that is going to remove favorite with the character data. I've written a whole lot of code here. So let's see, first of all, if anything has broken. And something is broken because I'm not seeing the image when I was before. So actually that's working just fine. So we see type error. Favorites is not iteratable. Favorites is not iteratable. Reading filter. So what's going on here? Something is wrong with the value of favorites all the way up here in app.jsx. And iterable means looping, right? And this error, this is sort of the key to the kingdom right here. We're calling filter on something undefined. And that's happening right here in my code. Because I don't have any favorites yet. There's nothing in this array. And I initialized it to null, which was a mistake, a programmer error. But if I initialize that to an empty array, this error should go away now when I click. And nothing is really happening here, which is not great. Not because there's a problem, but because I don't know if my code is working or not. So let's, as always, console.log favorites and see what happens. And let's refresh. Favorites is empty. Now favorites has one thing in it, presumably Jerry. And it looks like remove favorite might not be doing its job as I click on it. So I might have a problem here with my remove favorite function. And I wonder if the problem is in character data, because this code is relatively straightforward. And I wonder if here in the character card, something is going wrong. I'm not quite sure. What we'll just do here is in the app for remove favorite. We're going to refactor it a bit. We're going to add curly brackets to my arrow function and a return statement so I can console log and say remove favorite. And let's make sure it's being clicked. So it's being clicked, which is great. Let's change this to be an updated array so I can console log that. And as I'm doing this, I've realized my error, which, as is almost always the case, programmer error. I'm filtering just fine. I forgot to update the state. And now I can add someone and I can remove them. And our final step here is over here. Let's show different buttons depending on if they're a favorite or not. And this code is going to get a little messy. Normally I would refactor it to be a bit cleaner, but just sort of in the interest of time to knock this guy out, we're going to add our button to add a favorite. So we should only see that when someone, and let's fix our logic. If you're not in my favorites list, if this is false, then we want to add you to the list. I want that option. If you're already on the list, I want to be able to remove you. And I need some parentheses around this as well. And I just need to fix these curly brackets to be parentheses. Because this is so much stuff that the parentheses are needed so React can tell what's on the other side of the ternary. And now I can add Jerry and I can remove Jerry. And if I go to my favorites page, though this was a lot of work, all of a sudden it starts to become simpler because we can use outlet context. We can grab favorites from our outlet context. And then we can favorites.map and make a character card. And the key will be the ID, and the character data will be our character data. And I need to close my component, and let's see if we can get this looking nice. There is a lot of syntax. There we go. So that's looking better. And so now let's test this out. If I go to all characters and let's refresh, let's add Rick. Let's add Morty. Let's add Beth. And over here on favorites, cannot read properties of undefined. Interesting, because I think favorites should already exist. That tells me that I've made the best kind of error, which is an easy one to fix. Something is clearly wrong here. Favorites does not exist. And as always, I love console logging things to see where the problem is. And there's all these errors, but we see undefined. And the issue was I simply forgot to add favorites to the context object. And now this component state favorites that lives in the top level of my app is added to the context, right? So we have so many things in here, but I'll just put these two big ones just as reminders, characters and favorites. And it gets passed in anywhere we want because that context object gets passed into the outlet. And now on my favorites page, fingers crossed, So I apologize, guys. I think I'm going to have to. Oh, I may have to call it here because I do have to be somewhere. But there we go. No errors. And if we go to all characters and I add Rick and I add Summer and we go to favorites, we see Rick and Summer. And if I remove Rick, we just see Summer. So we were able to make it to the end of the build here. Unfortunately, I don't know if I'll have time to look at Cypress tests, but I hope that seeing this built end to end was helpful. So I just want to pause and see what questions folks have about this final piece of the puzzle, right? Whether it's about character data or the favorites page. Okay, awesome. Just to recap and kind of go over what I just did, a lot of the tricky work here was in the character card. And the big thing is outlet context, where again, we're passing in functions that really take care of business, right? And the character card doesn't have to know or care how these work, but I use these with buttons. And I can call these functions with the data for my individual character with these little arrow functions I put in the onclicks. And the ternary that I made here checks to see if a character is a favorite or not. If they're not, we show the user the button to add it. If they are, we show the user the button to remove it. And the logic for my favoriting begins with state that lives up here in the app that we pass in as context. And I wrote a whole bunch of helper functions. And I'm not going to walk through the JavaScript logic of what's happening here, just in the interest of time. But we are updating component state. And then because these helper functions work with this component state that lives up here, I can pass those functions down again through context, through the context object, right? Is favorite, add favorite, and so on. And then that's really the magic. And remember that the character card gets put inside our pages that are children of the outlet, right? If there's that old horror movie, Children of the Corn, well, we've got children of the outlet. And if I go way, way down here somewhere, we see an outlet. And inside that outlet component is my page. And then the character card is inside there. And because the character card is a child of the outlet, I can use the use outlet context hook. And that's sort of the magic piece there. All right. So let me pause here. I do have to hop. I apologize. Let's plan on rejoining at 4 o'clock Central, and we'll go over the assessment. And let me go ahead and stop the recording.